Hi everyone, I'm Tim Penketh of TheFutureEconomy.ca. We recently partnered with the CIO Strategy Council to explore the future of Canada's digital and data strategy. The Council's mandate is to provide a forum for Canada's most forward-thinking CIOs, or Chief Information Officers, to collectively transform the Canadian information and technology ecosystem. TheFutureEconomy.ca's Benay recently spoke with the Council's co-founder, Benay, and its executive director, Jansa. As you'll see, they argue that COVID-19 and the impacts it's having on how we work, how Canadians access healthcare, how we innovate, how our governments deliver services, and a variety of other aspects of our new normal require us to rethink Canada's digital and data strategy with increased urgency. They specifically point to the need to consider our collective approach to what they identify as the four main pillars of Canada's post-COVID-19 digital strategy. These are digital identity, data sharing, digital tools and talent, and finally cybersecurity. TheFutureEconomy.ca's discussion with Alex and Keith covers these and other key issues that are crucial to shaping Canada's digital future and provide plenty of recommendations for our governments, businesses, and all Canadians to consider in order to best position Canada for the post-COVID digital future. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Let's start with a quick introduction.
Hi, Alex Benay. I'm a partner at KPMG and formerly the CIO of Canada.
Hi, Keith Jansa, the Executive Director of the CIO Strategy Council, and previous to becoming the Executive Director as the VP of Standards and Innovation for the Council, and led it through its successful accreditation with the Standards Council of Canada as a standards development organization.
Well, it's great to have you both. To get us started, give us your general perspective on where we stand now in Canada in terms of digital capacity, in terms of resilience in both the public and the private sector.
So I think what we witnessed as a result of the pandemic is a refocusing of priorities, both within the public and private sector. It's become clear that there is a need for digital transformation, regardless of what organization or what sector that you come from. The pandemic has created an urgency to move from transformations that would take years to what's required in sheer months as a result of moving toward remote work and to continuing to realize, business and competitive advantages, even though, we're sort of locked down during this current crisis.
Alex, anything to add to that?
I agree with Keith. The thing I would add is that there's been a realization. I'm not sure there's been a pivot necessarily. So at least in public sector. So you're still seeing a lot of service counters, for example, rely on the old analog mechanism of standing in line and going to go get a service, when if you think about it, like your driver's license, and we're in the province of Ontario, at least Keith and I are, and there's no reason that your insurance company couldn't renew your driver's license for you. It has the exact same information as the government. So we haven't changed the underlying business model. We've realized that maybe we need to get more connected. I think that's, you're seeing the investments in Nova Scotia, in Ontario and other provinces. But to say that we've changed the underlying business model of government, let's say, for example, or even other industries, I'm not quite sure we've unfortunately leveraged the pandemic to the fullest extent possible.
I think one of the key dynamics or shifts that we've seen is collaboration between the public and private sector. I think, during this current crisis, it's been clear that there's been a willingness and openness of working together, of solving for some critical issues to ensure that, Canadians not only are safe, but can continue to rely on the infrastructure that's in place to go to work, to watch over their children, to all those critical services that we quite often take for granted.
Alex, from your perspective, has COVID-19 really changed a lot of what we're discussing right now in terms of Canada's digital, let's say, position, or has it only magnified it, accelerated it, or in some sense weakened our position?
I think it's helped to highlight deficiencies in certain areas. There's still regions of the country that aren't connected, and that's being resolved and being accelerated. I think it's helped, to Keith's earlier comment, bring sectors together in a way that possibly we had never thought of. So if you think about the feds, working through the banks to issue sort of relief. So I think there's been a lot of positive on that front. I think it's highlighted deep issues in our country around federation. We don't have a national contact tracing app like most other countries do, because it has to be voluntary depending on the province you're in. I don't know if I feel super good about that as a Canadian. Or being able to move supply chains so that a plastic producer in Alberta knows that he or she can send his plastic to a mask production company in Quebec that has a shortage of materials. Like, that interprovincial trade stuff is still there. So I think it's accelerated, it's highlighted things, there's been good actions. I still think that there's a lot, if we're going to be talking about a digital nation, there's a lot of old world industrial age economics legacy stuff that we still have to tackle. And frankly, that's the hard stuff. Otherwise, it's kind of like just a nice book cover. And so we still have to tackle the hard stuff, I think.
Canada is a very democratic, very decentralized country. And so, changing that in terms of a data strategy, digital strategy, just like for an energy strategy or a health strategy, it's a huge endeavor, isn't it? Is it even realistic to consider that we could change that? Alex, I think you have to start on that one. I'm
a bit of a cynic. That said, I'm cynical. That said, I do, like, just to be clear, I'm a proud Canadian, so please, somebody watching this think that I'm not.
We all are.
Right. B, I do think that the current model has value in it. We have some of the best healthcare in the world. Our education system's pretty good. But what it's highlighted is, short of enacting wartime measures, right, which we didn't in the case of the pandemic, like, you can't really do a Canada thing really easily. So I think to not throw out the baby with the bathwater here, we're not talking about, a unified education system, but think about it. If provinces are going online faster on the education front than other provinces, won't we have parts of our country all of a sudden, if there is a second and a third wave, that are completely not providing the same level of education from one part of the country to the next? So because digital and data does not care about some of our industrial age complex, like borders and think of the cloud and just all these other things, we do have to have some really serious conversations. I think it's probably time for a different discussion around Fed-Prov relationships in some of these areas. But that's a touchy subject when there's minority governments nationally and provincially and all these other things. So frankly, it becomes a political thing quite quickly.
Well, Keith, you're not in the government or political realm yourself. Perhaps you could share your sort of external input.
From my perspective, I think what the pandemic has done is, as much as we've had to accelerate, deployment of some critical infrastructure so that we're able to get, subsidies or support to Canadians, I think, at the same time, what it's demonstrated is that the ability to do this quickly and to iterate on to improve, this notion of continuous improvement, is not a bad thing. And I think for our country, I think oftentimes and in many strategies, you're brainstorming, you're going through this strategic cycle, you're trying to essentially solve for everything, you're trying to make things perfect. And oftentimes you're so focused on strategy, you don't actually implement anything. So for me, whether within the public or private sector, I think what this has done is there's been an urgent need to do something now. And regardless of the bureaucracy, regardless of our current institutions and the way in which we govern ourselves, there's been a clear shift that we can do it quickly and we can iterate on. And it may not necessarily be perfect, but there's this opportunity to continuously improve on it. And so I wouldn't shy away from having these sorts of discussions. I wouldn't shy away from making this iterative change and improvement, because quite frankly, if we don't, we're simply pedaling and we're not going anywhere.
You're talking about entrepreneurialism here, or entrepreneurship, which of course for the government, Keith, Alex, maybe this one's for you. Are we saying here that the government needs to be a bit more entrepreneurial and perhaps not be afraid to fail even? because we need to try and not, be stuck in our ways.
Yeah, I think listen, governments across the country have shown a willingness to take risks in the last 6 months.
Yeah, for sure.
Even at the risk of making mistakes, like there's enough in the papers without me highlighting a couple of the big ones around making mistakes, but frankly, media like to pick on the stuff that's negative because it sells papers better. But there's been a lot of think of CERB put up in 4 weeks. Yes, it's not a perfect program, but you know what? It got the job done. And so kudos from a political leadership perspective to our national and provincial governments, because they've all rolled up their sleeves. I mean, I think the bureaucracy or the public service has responded as well as it could. The problem is now is they need to tackle large underlying systemic decades old issues in order, to Keith's point, to not just be about sort of peddling and sort of standing still. If we're going to be serious about being a digital country, we need virtual education. We need telehealth in the regions, because you're not going to send a doctor to a 100-person village. It's just not going to, right? You're not going to open a new government service counter in a 100-person village in Nunavut. It's just not going to happen. So the first delivery mechanism of choice of any service, whether you're public or private sector, has to be digital, and this country has to make the pivot. So in order to do that, there's some really big key components that are missing. So that's the next step. Otherwise, we've responded well, and the elastic will snap back and we'll go back to what it was. And we'll make a whole bunch of excuses and reasons why we can't change the business model, right? And so, I mean, and other countries, just to be clear, the list is Estonia, Denmark, Israel, South Korea, New Zealand. There's a pattern there. They're all small, right? And sort of they are all nimble and agile in how they're executing things, whether that's changing regulations to create economic opportunities, changing service delivery models. There's some stuff there we need to learn from in order to progress.
Well, let's get into the meat of it all. Let's talk about some of those key elements or pillars of a strategy. Keith, I'm going to ask you to start here, and we're going to talk about digital ID. Why is digital ID actually so important?
Quite simply, it's, are you who you say you are? How do you represent that digitally? How do I know that the interaction I am having with someone through the internet, through any sort of means of communication that's digital, how do I know you are who you say you are? And then when you start to apply that across different sectors, whether it's the delivery of healthcare services, or about somebody's immigration status, or any of these other interactions that you have, it becomes crucial that as an entity consuming or interacting with an individual, that you are dealing with the right person. And so when it comes to being a digital first nation, when it comes to being a digital nation, the foundation of all of this is digital identity. You need to get that right for all the other economic and social benefits that can be gained from sharing data, to the way in which we procure devices, from how we go about ensuring cybersecurity. What underpins all of this is digital identity. The notion that you as an individual can have access to services that not only are between one specific organization, but across an ecosystem where I can effectively interact in a way that's secure, safe, and as the entity taking in that information and doing business with you has the assurance attached that I am working or servicing the right person.
Alex, what would be the impact for key stakeholders? For Canadians first, we're talking about their identity. That's, of course, all of us. For governments, for the private sector, if we get this right. And is there, do you believe, at the highest level in Canada, and I'm, of course, referring to the government first, a realization of this potential impact?
I don't think there's a realization. If I'm being honest, I failed for 3 years in a row to get this at the level of awareness that it required. So that's on me. But in fairness to me, and in fairness to political and bureaucratic leadership in our country at all levels of government, it's not a really easy, tangible thing to fund, right? So the best way to describe it is, if you want if you want your services to be delivered anywhere safely around the world or around the country, or if you want, more banks offering more government services, or your insurance company to renew your driver's license, or your digital fridge to issue food recalls one day, you need identity. You're not going to get to seamless service delivery as a citizen or know your customer in the banking world or public service delivery in government if you don't have that one piece of core identity that could actually glue all of these services together. And so if government's serious about changing, one of the things they'll look at is digital identity, because then they can become a platform. They no longer need to have the monopoly on citizen services. They could distribute that to an ecosystem like an Amazon. And people will call me crazy for saying these things, but what better platform than government to create jobs through changing how we do service delivery? Well, in order to do that, you need digital identity, because that's the glue that holds everything together, and data exchange platforms. But like the importance cannot be understated. And the one thing I'd say is our country's federation, this is where it's hurt it for the last 4 or 5 years, because a lot of other countries have just executed. Right? Like we say we can't do Estonia because they're the leaders globally in this stuff because it's too small. Okay, well, India is deploying 1.25 billion digital identities as we speak. So if they could do it, we should be able to do it as well. But because every region is looking at this differently, because we've had 2 or 3 different associations try to figure it out, we've just recently had a new national standard on digital identity that Keith's put forward in partnership with the Digital Identity and Accreditation Council of Canada to leverage their work. But it's been a hard road for us, because this is an area where we needed sort of strong national leadership. And we still need to see that happen right now.
Is the opportunity to have government take the lead right now enhanced by COVID-19? I mean, it seems like the economy today is driven by the government. So is that just one other thing that the government should do, and now is the best time to do it?
Listen, I think if not now, then in my lifetime, I mean, I hope this is accurate, what I'm about to say next. I hope in my lifetime we have no better opportunity than right now. Because if we have another opportunity in my lifetime, it means there was another big problem down the road that, frankly, we'll be the COVID generation, and I don't want there to be a second kick at the can at this. But if not right now, then when? You need identity to do virtual education. You need identity to do telehealth. You need identity to get your bank services on them. You need identity for driver's license. You need identity for everything. So if providing a single identity to Canadian citizens is not in the cards for the federal government because of our federation, then regulation should be. Right? We need to regulate this space, and we need to regulate it pretty fast. And so the first step to that is some of the work that Keith and the crew have been doing at the CIO.
Alex, if you say if not now, then when, one more time, I'm going to start singing Tracy Chapman, okay?
Yes, well, I apologize.
It's a good song. So, Keith, you're sort of with the CIO Strategy Council, the hub, the sort of collaborative hub for all the CIOs across the country, or at least some of them, to help action on what we're talking about right now. So what kind of partnerships are needed or need to be formed to drive adoption of digital identity?
Essentially, this is where standards come in. They are the foundation that underpins any economy. They are what keeps products, services safe, reliable, where you look at performance. They are the direct result of why Canadians and citizens across the world take things for granted, is because things work. And so when it comes to digital identity, the foundation to any sort of future regulation or helping to inform any public policy, consensus-based standards are a strategic tool to set and help to inform those processes. And by having a consensus-based standard, it provides a signal to the marketplace as to the expectations of products and services, and an opportunity where you can effectively collaborate across an ecosystem to deliver services. And so, from a standardization point of view, this is a critical piece to the puzzle to ensure not only interoperability, but collaboration between different identities, between different entities, to be in a position to effectively deliver better services to customers, clients, or in the case of government, to citizens.
To wrap up this first part on Pillar 1, which is digital identity, I'm going to ask each of you to give us a few quick actionable steps. So, Alex, why don't you start with the private sector, given you've spent a lot of time in the public sector?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the easy route on this one. I think the standards that have been done at the CIO Strategy Council are national cross-cutting standards. On the identity space, deploy that standard. And in parallel with that, you need to actually keep in mind, if you're a big bank, for example, you need to operate in every province and territory. So like if you're not applying the standard, you're going to have to reinvent the wheel every time you're going to engage in a different province or territory or with another subsector or anything else. The only way to do this is to apply the CIO Strategy Council standard.
Keith, your turn, and why don't you tell us what you think those same sort of actionable steps are for the public sector?
Well, I think the public sector has a number of different levers that can be pulled to accelerate the acceptance and the adoption of a national standard. We talked about regulation, but as we all very well know, legislation and regulation takes time, and as a result, we're saying the time is now. And so there are other opportunities and other levers governments can pull to effectively create an ecosystem whereby you're accelerating the adoption. Consider things like procurement. Consider things like where you, with procurement, incorporating the standard in your procurement proposal, or the need for organizations to effectively adopt the standard and to deliver the service. You can look at things like granting grants and contribution agreements and those types of mechanisms where you can effectively embed the national standard to create not only the signal to the marketplace, but to in fact change the behaviors in the marketplace where we are all moving toward this national standard. So there are a number of levers that exist for government. It's not all regulation. Government has a real strong voice when it comes to what is the expectation, what are the signals that I, as government put onto within the marketplace. So there are levers that oftentimes are put to the wayside or not taken into consideration. You consider if you're let's say you have a grant program, and as part of the weighted criteria you use, you ask the question of whether or not the solution or the project or the research is embedding any of the requirements of the national standard or how it relates. And then weighting it accordingly in whether or not you provide a grant to an organization or not for research or for any R&D or otherwise. So there's tremendous opportunity. The other aspect that governments can do is around certification. Governments can effectively create a mechanism where the onus isn't necessarily on the government as an enforcer to regulation, to ensure that it's implemented. They could actually leverage certification programs and schemes whereby third-party organizations go about auditing and assessing organizations on whether they're adhering to various standards that exist in the marketplace. So again, there's tremendous amounts of mechanisms that exist and different levers that can be pulled to not only incentivize change in behavior, but to also move us now versus waiting for any sort of regulation to come.
Tell us a little bit about the importance of data sharing between public and private sector in the digital economy. But more importantly, tell us about the benefits we as a country, as an economy, as different constituents, and then most importantly, as Canadians, would get from getting it right in terms of collaboration, innovation, and the development of new economic opportunities.
There's so many different roadblocks to this. We still manage privacy in a lot of ways in the country as if you can't do anything because of privacy. So we manage privacy like we were still in the industrial age. And this is regardless of sector. Like our PIPEDA work is not complete yet. We've got privacy regulations and legislation, I should say, in the federal government that predates the computers. And we approach the problem from like the opportunity of digital service delivery, of economic development opportunities from a kind of pre-digital age way. And so I'll give you an example. In the federal government alone, there's 187 pieces of legislation. We did a study that had to change to permit data sharing within the federal government. We did a public survey. Just under 70% of Canadians believed in the benefit, that it was okay for government departments to share data amongst themselves. And that was with very little public education. That survey was conducted. So, it's much safer in today's day and age to actually limit data distribution and having 1,000 different silos in the federal government, let alone across sectors, as opposed to having a few sort of really secure places where you're not sharing data anymore. You're just authenticating. Like, is John Doe 27, lives in Alberta, makes $80,000 a year? Yes, CRA, thank you, mortgage approved. It's done. It should take a nanosecond, right? But instead what we do is we continue proliferating the fax industry because some of our legislation, is outdated, and some legislation has the word fax machine in there. So I don't know which human thought that the fax machine was going to be the pinnacle of human development and the existence of our species, but thank you for that. Because it's, as Keith pointed out, it's super hard to change legislation. So I do think we need to figure out a different approach, a safer approach, one that still respects privacy, that increases service delivery, that increases the speed of our economy, frankly, because we can't have a digital economy at the pace of the fax machine. And a fax machine is no more secure, frankly, right, than a piece of data floating around on the internet. So it's different protocols, different measures, but it's such an opportunity. Again, it's an area where we need to see public sector leadership. It's an area that we also need to see private sector leadership because, if you look at things like open banking and better data sharing in that space, everybody should want that, public and private, right? But again, because it's different, it kind of challenges our comfort levels a little bit, and there's some public education that's required. And so essentially the countries that are doing this well, Finland educating 500,000 Finnish residents on AI, and Uruguay on how to do government services online, have spent the time educating their population. And that's something we don't do very well in Canada. So we need to accelerate that particular area for sure.
What is our current ability to share data in Canada, even just between provinces and then, between different organizations, the public and the private sector?
Well, I think Alex, noted a very good example with the federal government and how difficult it can be just to share between departments. I think when it comes to the education piece, and maybe if I could leverage this as an opportunity to sort of look more citizen-centric or consumer-centric. Just think of all the interactions you have with an organization. Let's say you call into a call center and you want to address something regarding the services. How many times have you, in turn, talked to one person and then be directed to another person only to repeat the whole story again, to then do it again and again and again?
Many times. Sorry, I think I just felt I needed to let it out.
So from a citizen-centric or a consumer-centric view here, there are interactions we're having on a day-to-day basis as individuals where we get extremely frustrated and, quite frankly, can be easily solved. And what solves it is the data sharing piece. And this is why when we talk about data sharing, it's not even data sharing across different organizations or between organizations. It's within the same organization. Alex highlights that well. When you think about the government of Canada, individuals aren't thinking about individual departments that they need to interact with. They're thinking, I'm interacting with the government of Canada. And so the need to have to continually repeat information or to disclose information to multiple departments or even to multiple individuals within an organization or across different organizations, you can start thinking as a citizen or as an individual of the vulnerabilities that causes. The fact that your information is in multiple places, in multiple different silos, that can effectively be, subject to bad actors, and whereby, it gets exposed. And we're all very well aware of, data breaches that occur, and we're hearing it in the news on a weekly basis. So when I think of the education piece, I think just think about your day-to-day interactions with organizations and how often you are needing to inform a person or another person of the same thing you already articulated to them in the first place. So for me, that's the crux of this. In addition to that, I think when we look at data sharing, the analogy I like to use, and I think Alex even referred to it before in the past, is we need to create the digital equivalent of the railroad. You have a railroad system in Canada where you can put products and services and have that go from one part of the country to another. Multiple organizations benefit from the use of that infrastructure to be able to deliver products and services to their customers, to their clients, and in the case of government, to citizens. We need that equivalent for data in the digital world, where we're creating the digital infrastructure necessary to effectively exchange data between organizations and across organizations so that we can be more effective and efficient in our service delivery to customers, clients, and citizens.
Thank you, Keith. This was very clear. The message was very clear too. So in the current COVID-19 reality, do we have unique opportunities to capitalize on and ultimately to accelerate data sharing in the recovery economy?
I think the opportunities are quite real and right in front of organizations and individuals for the picking. I think there's lots of low-hanging fruit. I think there's pockets within the country that are doing an enormous and a great amount of work to realize on those opportunities, whether in healthcare, whether in agriculture, whether within government. I think what becomes crucial in any of these, and this is something that I find extremely important, is as much as we have these pockets of activity and this innovation occurring, we need a way to effectively replicate it across other parts of the country and to benefit from it. So those strategic investments that are going into solving for some of these problems, whether it's in BC or in Ontario or Nova Scotia, we need a way, we need a mechanism to effectively replicate. And this is, again, where standardization is a critical strategic tool of doing that. It creates an opportunity to set requirements to leverage based on use cases and success stories to be able to provide that guidance and those tools to other parts of the country and to other sectors so that they can then also go about codifying within their internal practices or within their, the technologies they use, et cetera, or in their deployment to transform their businesses. So I think this, again, is that we are a country often referred to as a country of pilots. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if you leverage the strategic investment of the pilot to have it replicated for the success and benefit across the country. And the tool to do that is through standardization.
So Alex, this one is going to be for you as a former government leader, the CIO of the government of Canada. Perhaps your hands are a little freer to speak and perhaps to issue recommendations. What do you expect government to play in terms of policy, investment, or other means to improve Canada's data sharing ecosystem in the coming years?
So first of all, the statement you made in saying that I'm freer to make recommendations. I guess I went into the job just to be clear that I would make them recommendations one way or another, come hell or high water, because I just thought they were the right thing to do. So, and so I'm going to continue making those recommendations. I think we need a much more aggressive legislative agenda from our political leaders at all levels of government. If you look at Denmark, they have a team of about 10 legislators. All they do is review every piece of legislation that goes into their parliamentary system, into their political system against the digital economy. Everything from education to health to economic development, everything gets a digital lens. We don't get any of that. We don't even get policy integration at the highest levels necessarily either. So I think we need a much, much more aggressive legislative reform. Our privacy acts federally are outdated, and we've been trying to bring them up to speed for years. We don't have the right regulations in the right sectors. Some of our regulations are roadblocks. Think about all the regs that have to get a COVID lens and how long that would take us if we don't use AI, for example, to look at the impact of our regulations, and we could do predictive modeling against the changes. Like, we are not fighting fire with fire. So when you're asking me on the data sharing front, I think we just need a much, much broader, ambitious digital legislative reform. Again, the problem is that's hard to explain politically and win votes because it's so ambiguous. If you do it well, it should be invisible. That doesn't get you a vote, right? Invisible doesn't get you votes. So we have to kind of have, clearly it's working in countries like in Estonia, in the UK and other countries where they could put public policy debates on digital at the forefront. We're not doing that at all. So we just need to get a much, much more aggressive legislative agenda.
I'm going to continue with you, Alex, for just a moment, and we're segueing into Pillar 3, which is digital tools and talent. And of course, a lot of those tools, a lot of those technologies are ultimately created by the private sector. And again, in the current environment, we know that the entire private sector, but especially SMEs and startups that are still very vulnerable, are a lot of them are struggling, sadly. And this is a real problem, of course, as we're trying to grow our economy in general and to innovate more and to, I would say, grow some of those innovations into global success stories. That's a sort of an endemic problem Canada has. What can be done, in your opinion, whether from the government or others, to better support the growth of Canada's tech companies?
Well, I mean, if you look at the US, they used fintech and open banking as a way of getting some of the stimulus and support funding out the door. We didn't. We chose our big banks. And I'm not criticizing big banks, by the way. They did an amazing job. That's not the point. But you could have chosen a different path, right? So on one hand, we have governments federally and provincially investing in innovation and AI and all of these things. And we've created a great ecosystem. And then when push comes to shove, we don't use them to build capacity. So I think governments of all stripes in the world are going to start. This is not meant to be a nationalistic undertone, but I was in Paris when it was shutting down. We're trying to make our way back to Canada, and I was shocked at hearing Macron's speech talking about French national economy and maybe bringing, well, as a Frenchman, like bringing some of the things that have been sort of European sort of based back into France. I think you're going to see more of that as a trend. And so, like, we've got a really good tech sector. We should use it for every single time push comes to shove. And I'm not saying don't just use Canadian companies, not Americans. Like it doesn't matter because the ecosystem is there. IBM uses partners that are Canadian, for example, and other things. So I would just think like there's such an opportunity to actually use that tech sector for problem solving, not just grants and money and investing, but like actual problem solving that would help those companies grow through contracts. So procurement to me is the most direct route where we could start leveraging some of our SMEs because, the Feds spend $300 to $400 billion a year. Like, take 5% of that and give it to the innovation sector as contracts like the Americans do, maybe not that percentage, but there's clear programs to favor Buy America First. Like we need to get really serious about this if we're going to be competitive globally, because I hope that I'm wrong, but you may start seeing markets start to close off a little bit or sort of prefer national solutions. Well, we got to do the same thing. So, and if that starts, then it could help continue to kind of support our SMEs in our innovation sector without it having to be grants or handouts.
Keith.
Well, I think what's key to recognize is that, you look at the amount of retooling that private sector has done to meet the needs and the demand, whether PPE or otherwise, and all because we didn't have the resilience in our own country. We were dependent on a number of foreign actors to be able to ensure our economy continues to run and is continued to be safe. So I think this has shed a huge spotlight on a real challenge, a real problem for the country, is that we need to create the type of resilience where we can sustain ourselves. When it comes to how do you effectively do that, I think one of the critical tools is procurement. I think when it comes to government procurement, we're all very cognizant, again, similar to legislation and regulation, it can take a lot of time. Now, there's been great pockets of work that's been taking place in federal and provincial governments to go more agile, to go more iterative, to really look at what's the problem I'm trying to solve versus saying, here's what I need, and really having the private sector innovate and provide solutions that effectively address and solve for those problems. So I think, again, there's an opportunity here to look at how we procure digital products and services, and to do so in a way that, again, it can't take years. By the time you procure the solution in digital, it's changed so significantly. So we need to be, as much as we're open and transparent in a process and the governance associated to procurement practices, we need to get real when it comes to the longevity of these investments and how effectively those solutions will be 3 years from now if we're not procuring it today, but in 3 years. So again, providing very practical guidance and advice and requirements that can help, again, inform procurement processes across the country is something that the council is very active in. Just recently, we approved our Standards Policy Committee, representing a subset of our council members, approved the new work to develop a standard for agile procurement of digital products and services. And the aim is all about adding in the flexibility, providing an open process, but also providing the tools in the marketplace to do this right, and to help inform procurement officers across the country, whether in the public or private sector, on a way of doing business where we can leverage the strategic investments and ensure that, again, those economic development opportunities and the social benefits we gain from these types of procurement opportunities is something that we realize.
Yeah, absolutely. So this pillar is called digital tools and talent. So we're going to finish on talent, which of course is absolutely essential. And from my perspective, and from what I'm hearing from many of our interviewees, is that Canada has at least improved at training, at attracting, at retaining talent. We've actually become quite competitive. Correct me if I'm wrong. How can we continue, building on this strength? What roles must key stakeholders, of course, we always go back to the government, but perhaps you could talk a bit as well about the private sector and academia as well, to continue building our talent pool. Basically, it's essential in the tech world, right?
So I'd say yes. I think we've done an amazing job. This is the kind of thing that's never done, though. There are opportunities south of the border to attract even Canadians back to come back and work in Canada. There's a lot of American companies that are now looking to spread their talent pool across the world, not just in the US. The one thing I would challenge us is to think differently about tech talent than talent in any other sector, though. And I'll look to Estonia as an example. They now have an e-Estonia business program where you could launch your business, register it as an Estonian business from anywhere in the world and never set foot in the country, right? They'd be the first people to say, why would you want to move to Tallinn anyways? It's dark, it's cold, our neighbors are rowdy. You may not want to come here, but we would love you to be an e-business in Estonia. And so if you think about it, that gives you access to the EU, for example, right? If you're a country in Africa that doesn't have, for example, or South America that doesn't have an EU free trade agreement, that's not fortunate enough to have one like Canada. So all of a sudden, the concept of you have to attract people in a country, because the old model used to be resources plus people equal production. Now it's, people plus ideas and data equals production. Well, you don't need to be physically here to manipulate the resource anymore. So here we are saying, come to Canada. We want you to immigrate to Canada. It's kind of like if we just focus on that as a model, it's a bit old school. And you're starting to see it, like Barbados. Here's a 12-month work visa program. Come and work from our beat. Like, frankly, we're all going to be facing that decision, hopefully, in the fall and winter as Canadians, as winter comes around. But like we have to think about talent attraction in a digital age and not apply industrial age construct to this anymore, right? So that goes from, if you're a Canadian company, where do you hire in the country? That helps inclusivity, it helps diversity, it helps gender gaps, it helps everything else if you could hire from pretty much where the talent resides. And that does not have to be in a country. So I would just say we've done great work, we've done good thinking. We need to think it way outside the box. Our policymakers need to think way outside the box on this one, because COVID's blown the whole model up, frankly.
So sounds like a great point, and it's a very clear image when you say we're applying industrial age approaches to 21st century, when we're actually talking about trying to move into the future economy. Keith, you have anything to add on talent?
I do. When you look at even with what happened with COVID and folks working from home and the whole idea around upskilling or reskilling to be able to continue to remain productive in a different environment, I think it becomes, again, very telling in this current environment that we can be just as productive so long as we're providing the necessary tools and training to individuals to effectively do their job. And so I think this is where it becomes interesting when you talk about an ideas economy, where the notion of what a 4-year degree program provides versus micro-credentialing and these other types of avenues that can be explored for effectively upskilling and reskilling your workforce to deliver on the productivity and the solutions for a country to continue to have it as prosperous as it can be. I think Alex hits a nail on the head when it comes to, you don't actually need to be in Canada to benefit the Canadian economy by virtue of the way in which you can work in a digital environment. So, I think there's opportunities here at how the very constructs of the way we educate, and we're seeing it just in school age children now having to, parents making the decision on distance learning. This is something novel, new, but necessary. And I think, again, when it comes to talent acquisition, there's also a great opportunity. The border's closed to the U.S. So those that are going down to the U.S. or Canadians that recent graduates that, were destined for Silicon Valley, we have a real opportunity right now that I would say in many ways is a once in a lifetime. I don't know. I'm going off of what Alex said before. I hope we don't have another major pandemic or some other situation that results in the kind of restrictions and closures that we've experienced. But like the time is now. There's tremendous talent in the country that can benefit from great employment within both the public and private sector to keep our country competitive and prosperous moving forward.
We're going to talk about cybersecurity now, the fourth pillar. What I'm curious to know is, what is Canada's specific cyber risk? Is it any different than anywhere else? And based on our current capacity, digital infrastructure, and assets, what do we need to do to defend ourselves, basically?
In the federal government, I think it was budget 2018, huge investments in cybersecurity. And as part of those investments, it was looking at the small medium enterprise, and as a result, spin up of a new cybersecure Canada program for the certification of small medium enterprises. Within that program, a list of controls to improve your cyber posture, etc. I think what's crucial to recognize, though, is as much as you can look at the business in terms of their practices, their protocols, their controls they have in place, what hasn't been solved is the device itself. As much as there are international, regional, national standards that touch on various products and services and solutions, when it comes to cybersecurity, the discussion has been central around the management, the way in which we put controls in place and how we manage the risk. From my perspective, and from where even members of the council have converged on when it comes to cybersecurity, we need to talk about the cybersecurity of the devices and the systems themselves, and the level of assurance or the need for confidence when it comes to whether or not these devices, in fact, are designed, with security in mind. You think of all the Internet of Thing devices out in the marketplace. You have situations where you don't even have a real interface with the IoT device. It's a sensor. It's collecting data. It's a huge vulnerability in terms of accessing within the whole entire system. So when you don't have the ability, or where you have cybersecurity solutions or standards that are out there that call on you to, ensure you have a username and password, there are devices in the marketplace you can't put a username and a password. Yet again, that's our defining these requirements in a bit of a vacuum to specific ways in which how we dealt with cybersecurity before. But with this proliferation of new devices in the marketplace, there's huge vulnerabilities, and it's attacking those vectors that will consume us all with the latest privacy or data breaches we're experiencing on a weekly basis.
Alex, you might have some inside information. I don't know how much you can share, but how vulnerable is Canada's digital infrastructure, our data networks, our digital assets in a general sense?
Listen, every country is vulnerable. So maybe we start with that. If Canada's position is not we're vulnerable, then we're being ignorant. Because it's just we're putting our head in the sand, because the government of Canada got attacked like tens of thousands of times a day, as do the banks, as do our energy infrastructure. We're talking millions of hits a day across critical infrastructure, both physical and digital. So I do think that we are vulnerable. I think that every country is vulnerable. So it needs to start from that position. I think as a result of COVID, if we're here, Keith and I, preaching on we need to make everything digital, that assumes that there's ample security protocols in place, and that we have to continuously fight the good fight on cyber and continuously invest in it. So one round of investment isn't enough. Growing talent isn't enough. you go work for a security agency in Ottawa, Google picks you up in California and offers you 4 times the salary. Nobody's going to say no to that, So we need to have a talent strategy. We need to have a training strategy, an investment strategy. We do this, by the way, in partnership with a lot of partners globally, other countries around the world. I just think we've actually positioned ourselves to be properly equipped to be a player in this space internationally. But then there's state-sponsored cyber, there's individual actors, there's kids in their basement, and there's everything in between. So this is a space that you're never going to be finished. It'd be kind of like saying in today's world, I don't know, pick a critical infrastructure. Like, have we invested enough in our roads? Well, I mean, if we stop investing in our roads, they're going to fail, right? And they're going to crack, and it's going to be horrible. Well, cyber is as critical to a country now as road infrastructure.
Is cybersecurity and building our defense, systems a matter of just defense, being basically just protecting what we have, or does that actually also give us advantages, and does it empower us to be more competitive in the future economy?
I think one bad incident hurts your competitiveness as a country, as a business. Look at what happened with Desjardins in Montreal. That was a big incident, and that's hurt them. And when countries get hacked, like, that's a problem, and it hurts. And then the industries suffer. All the surrounding industries around public sector suffer. So listen, I do think that it's a matter of national competitiveness. And as far as the digital economy is concerned, in fact, as far as the analog industrial age sort of economy is concerned as well, because you could hypothetically blow up a power plant using a cyber attack. So, right. So, I mean, these things are all super critical. So it's fun and sexy to talk about the stuff we were talking about the first half of this show, but the stuff that's less sexy is the cyber. But if you don't have that good hygiene, you're not doing any other stuff we talked about, right? Like, it's not a precondition, but you have to do it in parallel.
Keith?
Well, I like the analogy of the roads. Again, we're taking something from industrial age. You keep investing in those roads. There's no reason why, from a digital point of view, you wouldn't continue to invest in cybersecurity. I think regarding your question around competitiveness, absolutely, there is an opportunity for innovative companies with cyber secure solutions to be able to demonstrate that in the marketplace, to differentiate themselves. And there are, critical tools they could certify against national standards that have been developed, or international standards, to, again, differentiate themselves in the marketplace. Canada has tremendous talent in cybersecurity and great companies that are doing this work. Again, you connect that between the procurement conversations we were having, and in addition to that, have this trust and assurance attached to, or certification associated with the devices. It's a win-win. It's a real ability for Canada to demonstrate on a global stage that we're serious when it comes to us becoming a digital nation.
So to wrap up a little bit, I want to ask you both about the future. We're called TheFutureEconomy.ca, and I'm going to ask you to predict the future as much as you can. I mean, at least share your vision for Canada's digital future if we act on all the things we've talked about today, and perhaps the risk if we don't.
I think when it comes to a modern national blueprint, when we're talking about that vision, we need to solve for the 5 things we discussed. We need trusted digital identity. We need secure data sharing. We need agile procurement. We need to talk talent and talent acquisition, and we need cybersecurity. If we collectively, and this both public and private sector, invest in these areas, focus, again, the pandemic being an opportunity to refocus priorities. If we solve for these things, we're talking billions and billions of dollars, from efficiencies to opportunities that would be unrealized if we don't address these. These are core to any digital nation. We see it. Alex has mentioned a number of countries that are there, and these are core to what they have. When it comes to a vision of a digital nation, there are tremendous examples out there that we have touched on in this interview that exist. And so when it comes to Canada, all I am saying is that we have an opportunity here to replicate, to advance our economy in a way that other countries have, and that we can truly realize a service delivery model that is digital first in this country across all sectors of the Canadian economy, full stop.
Alex, would your vision be fundamentally different?
I think the things that Keith mentioned are spot on. I think I'm going to just focus my answer more on the how. I think if boards in Canada continue to be filled with people that have no idea about tech, how do you expect your corporations to shift? If your executives aren't digital first, whether you are a CFO, an HR officer, how do you expect your industry to make a pivot? If you're a senior government person in the elected side of that equation in government, and your policies don't go through a digital first lens like other countries, how do you expect to make the pivot? If your bureaucracy is not used to doing things with the levers they do have to favor digital innovation and digital first, like the amount of excuses I heard why Canada could not do digital first service delivery during my time in government must have been 10 times a day. So if you don't change your thinking, and if you don't equip yourselves with either the right process, the right senior level lens, and the right challenge function, like, of course, these big systems, whether they're government, banks, insurance companies, transportation companies, they won't change, right? Because there's, like, I mean, it's a big system. Like, you know, the system's existed for 150 something years the way it is. So I do think that the how, Keith has the what. I think the how comes down to leadership, you know, and I'm going to say something that I'm probably going to regret, but you're seeing a lot of these leading countries that are making this digital pivot. Their leadership is from a newer generation. Okay. And I will challenge anybody on this podcast to tell me that that's wrong, because you look at Finland, you look at New Zealand, right? Look at Estonia. It's a new generation of leadership there that is taking the country down a new path. And I'm not saying that this is an ageism comment, because I'm going to get slammed for this. But if you don't bring the inclusion, and if you don't expand the inclusion lens of what's possible and bring in a digital first approach, then it is an ageism comment. But if you're one of those leaders that is expanding that scope and letting that transformation take place and being an enabler of that transformation, then this comment doesn't apply to you, right? But otherwise it does. And so we need to give ourselves a really hard look about how we are executing against this stuff. It's more than an economist article, because we're smart people, we get it, but nobody's sort of doing the what and the how and the nitty gritty to make that shift. So I think Keith's list is spot on. I would just like to see different leadership approaches, or different leaders if the different leadership approaches don't work.
Gentlemen, anything to add? Is there anything we haven't touched on, or any messaging you wanted to get across today?
I think I'm in trouble enough as it is after that last one, so I'm going to stop.
Keith?
No, this has been great. Very much appreciate the opportunity to discuss and have an open conversation on what we need to eventually, what to see as a country, but also what we all each have something to do.
Likewise, very appreciative of you both. I know you're both very busy guys. Alex and Keith, thank you very much for sharing your perspectives on these issues that are clearly very important for the whole economy, for a whole array of sectors, for government, for the private sector, for Canadians as well. And ultimately, you know, our goal at TheFutureEconomy.ca is to promote our future economy, to have it be more competitive, for Canada to lead in as many areas as possible. So we're very grateful for these recommendations that we hope will be heard by policymakers, by corporate Canada, by all Canadians. There's a lot to consider there, but there's also a lot of opportunity. So thank you both very, very much. And hope to do this again sometime.
Thank you for having us.